It's always fascinating. A walk through a remote wooded area, a climb up a mountain, and suddenly a mysterious ruin appears in front of you. Abandoned places are everywhere in the world, and many of them are still waiting to be discovered. Some are hidden in inaccessible areas, some are just superbly camouflaged or inaccessible due to military use. However, it's worth keeping an eye out because extraordinary objects can be discovered everywhere, even in our own surroundings. Are you fascinated by mysterious things and archaeological discoveries? Then give us a thumbs up, subscribe to Hidden Worlds, and join us on our journey. The abandoned ghost hotel in Bali. Bali is known for its temples and its wonderful landscape. Thousands of tourists visit the Indonesian island every year, so building a luxury hotel seems like a lucrative proposition. This is likely what the investors thought when they started to build the Bedugul Taman Rekreasi Hotel near Lake Beratan in the 90s. However, this Balinese-style ensemble never opened. The hotel, picturesquely situated on the mountainside, was abandoned during the construction phase without ever seeing any visitors and left to decay. The locals believe that a curse lies on these walls and that the spirits of construction workers who died during the building process return to this place. A good reason for Bali holiday makers to get to the bottom of this mystery, even if there are perhaps more mundane reasons why the ghost palace in the jungle had to close its doors. Bus Garage number 7 in Kiev. On the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, where the residential areas merge into lush pine forests, there is a building that does not seem to belong here. It's almost as big as a football stadium and looks like a giant flying saucer that just happened to land on Earth. The futuristic-looking object is a relic from past Soviet times. Behind the facade, however, there is neither an arena nor a representative building of the communist rulers, nothing more than Bus Garage number 7. Built in 1973, the building was an important hub of the international and national bus routes leaving Kiev in its time. More than 1,400 people found work here, and more than 400 buses started their journeys here or were stored and repaired during the hard winter months. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the property became increasingly less important, and the final end for Bus Garage number 7 came in 2015. The design powerhouse in Hungary. In the middle of Budapest, on the banks of the Danube, stands an impressive example of Hungarian industrial history. When it was built in 1914, the Kenfold power station was one of the most powerful energy plants in Europe, but today it seems anachronistic to have such a building close to the city center. The interesting thing, however, is that the building was erected in Art Deco style and thus adapts to its surroundings. The function remains completely obscure to the observer. Hardly anyone would suspect an industrial plant behind the facade. The Kenfold power station was in operation until 2007 and is now a listed building, like almost all the historic buildings in the center of Budapest. Most of the plant has now been converted into private property, and at the same time, a kind of private museum has been created over the years. Visitors can admire intact machines and turbines on the grounds, but the control room is also fascinating, somehow reminiscent of Jules Verne with its levers, instruments, and glass ceiling in Art Deco design. The Myth of the Prora Seaside Resort. Evidence of the Nazi era can be seen all over Germany and Europe, but hardly any is as impressive or as well known as Prora. On the island of Rügen, an almost 4.5-kilometer-long lindworm of buildings winds along the beach of the Baltic Sea and today fascinates numerous visitors once again. Prora was planned in the 1930s by the organization Strength Through Joy and was intended as a holiday domicile with room for 20,000 guests. However, the outbreak of the Second World War prevented the resort from fulfilling its holiday function. Instead, the entire site became a restricted military area in the 1950s, and the buildings were used as barracks by the GDR border troops. In the course of the political turnaround in 1989, disputes about the historical heritage and a lack of utilization concept led to the progressive decay of the site. It was not until 2004 that amicable arrangements could be found for private investors, and at the same time, the hotel and gastronomy industry helped Prora to become a seaside resort after all. Eerie Dugar Radar. In the north of Ukraine is the most famous abandoned site in the world, Chernobyl. However, with the controlled opening of the nuclear-contaminated zone to visitors in 2011, the mysterious Dugar Radar has also come back into the public eye. Built during the Soviet era, the object is particularly interesting because its exact function remains largely unexplained to this day. The Dugar Radar used to be considered a closely guarded secret, although it rises visibly from the surrounding landscapes for kilometers. From a distance, it appears like a surreal, oversized wall. Only when you get closer do you realize that the structure consists of many individual objects. Hundreds of antennas and turbines are lined up in the Ukrainian nowhere, and with a height of 150 meters and a length of 700 meters, the dimensions of the entire object are gigantic. An ideal place for adventurers, but a visit to the decaying Dugar Radar is only possible as part of guided Chernobyl tours. The tunnels of the Risa Project. During the Third Reich, not only motorways were built. In some areas, entire mountains were hollowed out during that time in order to build protective bunkers or underground industrial facilities. One of the most impressive objects of this period are the tunnels near Budapest, also known as the Risa Project. The tunnel system under Fürstenstein Castle, several kilometers long, was built by forced laborers between 1943 and 1945, but opinions differ about the purpose of the facility. Some believe that the tunnels were to be used for the underground production of weapons. Others think that Risa was planned as a replacement for Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters. At the same time, the Risa Project is associated with another myth. It's said that a train fully loaded with gold disappeared in this very area and never reappeared. Adventurers have believed for decades that the legendary gold train could be found somewhere in the confusing tunnel system, but even the most promising attempts to locate it have failed every time so far. Ghost stations in Kiev. Tunnels also exist in other parts of the world. In large metropolises, entire track systems are often located under the city. Of course, an underground also includes stations, but in the Ukrainian capital Kiev, there are 3 stations that are somewhat unusual. Trains pass through here, but do not stop. All 3 stations were built in the 1990s, when the city decided to expand its metro network. 2 of the stations are in the north of the city, one of which was not completed because of disputes over access to the station, the other because of lack of funding. The 3rd station, located in the south of the city, exists only pro forma. It's located in the midst of extensive industrial facilities, and its further construction is not planned until the area is converted into a residential area. With 3 ghost stations, the city of Kiev may not have shown any planning skill, but at least it has created an unusual highlight. Turkish Disney castles. To live in a fairy tale castle or a medieval fortress is certainly a dream. In a small Turkish town in the northeast of the country, this wish can come true, because there are no less than 700 of these fantastic buildings to choose from. Each house has its own tower and 2 beautiful balconies, but the mini castles all look the same. So the settlement, which has a shopping center and a mosque, looks like a mirage and not like a suburban ideal. Maybe that's why almost only ghosts have moved into the empty haunted castles so far. This is anything but fairy tale-like for the Turkish Sarot group, which had to file for bankruptcy after the completion of the cute castles. In the meantime, Arab investors have taken over about half of the $450,000 buildings. Expensive kitsch is part and parcel of the Gulf, and perhaps the trend of living in a Disney castle will finally catch on. German Stadium. National Socialism was characterized by the megalomania of its protagonists. One of the projects planned during this period was the German Stadium. It was to be built as one of the monumental objects on the Reichsparteitagskalender in Nuremberg, and Hitler had entrusted his favorite architect, Albert Speer, with the responsibility for its realization. The finished stadium was to have been over 800 meters long, 400 meters wide, and almost 100 meters high. However, the project never got beyond the planning stage, and the arena, which was supposed to seat 400,000 spectators, was never realized. The Second World War and the end of the dictatorship prevented its realization. Today, the Strahov Stadium in Prague, which once had a capacity of over 200,000 spectators, is the largest sports facility ever built in the world. Its inner surface is now used as a training ground, while the rest of the building has fallen into disrepair, a fate that a completed German stadium should have shared with it. China's huge piles of car scrap. China is an up-and-coming country and has developed strongly economically in recent years. Increased prosperity has led many Chinese to buy modern new cars, while at the same time the government has decided to remove vehicles with excessive emissions from public roads. However, a solution for what to do with the many discarded cars, trucks and mopeds has not yet been found. The vehicles have to go somewhere, and so China is one of the countries with the most unusual scrapyards in the world. Often, the huge mountains of metal pile up far away from the big cities, but sometimes the situations take on bizarre forms. In Yiwu, residents of the outskirts have a huge truck graveyard on their doorstep. In Hangzhou, there is a huge pile of scrap metal in the middle of the city center. And near Chongqing, hundreds of yellow taxis are rusting away in a forest. Siberia full of tanks. Siberia is a wild and fascinating country. In the vastness of this sparsely populated area, many things have disappeared or have been deliberately hidden there. These things rarely come to light again, so it's quite extraordinary when a whole depot of military vehicles suddenly appears in the Siberian solitude. The Russian army was confronted with such a scandal a few years ago. At that time, about 100 tanks were discovered rusting away in the middle of the forest without any guard near the armament site in Yekaterinburg. This story could now repeat itself if the recently published pictures prove to be real. They are said to come from the far east of the country and show a fleet of vehicles of gigantic proportions. Hundreds of tanks, guns, trucks and other military equipment can be seen. However, the place and time have not yet been verified, so it remains exciting to see whether there is any truth to this find. Extraordinary places await. There are many fascinating places in the world. Some of them have achieved fame, others are still hidden. Some of the places shown here are witnesses of their time, others are shrouded in mystery or their existence is still not proven. You are welcome to comment on which of the places shown you already knew about and which ones particularly fascinated you. Perhaps you would like to visit unusual places yourself, or you can share your experiences.